You're watching The World. Welcome back. And now for all the top stories so far, let's bring in Dr. Marek Laskiewicz. Marek joins us from London. It's good to have you this weekend, Marek. We start from Myanmar, where this huge and disastrous earthquake has killed thousands. That figure keeps going up. What do we expect, now that they may be warning? I mean, shouldn't they have been warning before such magnitude quake happens?
Well, the warning is, of course, quite difficult in some ways because science still hasn't given us a perfect way. The warning that does work are about tsunamis, because obviously we know where the earthquake was or volcano, whatever that actually set it off. But earthquakes themselves are present? No. There are some signs about an earth movement in the tectonic plates, but clearly they're still not sufficiently advanced. The real question to be posing is, I think in Myanmar, is the technology already developed available to them, or were they using older technology? Because the modern technology is still imperfect, but maybe better than what they had. And therefore, in that respect, yes, they should check, because possibly a better warning of some sort might have been possible.
I hear you, Marek, but for seismologists, Myanmar is considered to be one of the most geologically active areas in the world because it sits on top of the convergence of 4 tectonic plates, and that brings the issue of proactive measures to the fore. What could have been done to avert the rate of deaths? Global aid is pouring in for Myanmar already. Residents already have aid coming in from India and all of that. Let's see how much effort that will bring in. But what do you make of this, 4 tectonic plates?
Well, there is one thing they could do, but now we switch to civil engineering. There are countries which sit on top of plates, and they have to make their earthquake buildings proof. So what happens is, there's 2 aspects to this. First of all, in Italy, they made a discovery that actually older structures survived better because they sort of were more plastic, gave, and then just snap. And also there's ways of annulling some of the movements which were done in Mexico. So here we have a point whereby sitting on top of 4 tectonic plates, it may well be that the civil engineering that was carried out was inadequate in view of today's knowledge. And another part of the inquiry should therefore focus on whether they can better earthquake-proof buildings, including such tall structures. In principle, it is possible, but of course 4 plates is a lot different than 2 or 1, and therefore, in that respect, it is a problem. I believe personally that it could have been better structured, that building.
Totally agree with you. And like we said, global aid pouring in. Let's see how that goes with those who are, being rescued. Let's move to the Israel-Gaza issue with Hamas in focus. Now, tens of thousands have died and are still dying from this war after the pause or breach of the ceasefire, if you like. The most notable event of late is the anti-Hamas protest. Help us understand how significant this is.
Yeah, it's extremely significant because Hamas has had a rule for years now, a total rule on the Gaza Strip, and for the first time it's being challenged. The problem is, of course, challenged in what way? Here the protests are simply anti-Hamas, as it would appear. The question is what would replace Hamas, or who would replace Hamas, I suppose, be more accurate. And to this extent, the protests aren't actually coming forth with answers. But the very fact that Hamas is no longer unquestionably in charge, in the sense that it speaks for everyone in Gaza, that is important and may well induce the Hamas government to be less, how can we put it, rigorous, more pliable in its negotiations, which would help.
Now, how much can we expect from these kinds of protests, Marek, especially knowing that Hamas still holds sway in much of Gaza, and some Palestinians wouldn't want to be seen as supporting what Israel wants, because after that protest, some people said they regret going out to protest, against Hamas.
Quite right. The point here is that a protest against Hamas can be quite easily equated as a protest which is pro-Israel, and this is, of course, a problem for the protesters. This is why, I repeat, what is very important for the protesters to make up precisely what they do want In other words, they have to come up with some concrete proposals. As for the Hamas regime, it is not going to be taken down by these protests. It's not even going to have its rule particularly altered. But what it does mean is it will have to take slightly more consideration of the popular views. And I imagine that in its negotiations with Israel, as I said, it could be more pliable. But it is up to the protesters now to be, I think, more specific, more concrete in their demands, which could involve simply Hamas slightly changing direction in some way.
So you think this can pressure Hamas to change direction in all of this?
I think a slight change of direction. It wouldn't be major, but it might, as I say, induce them to approach the whole problem somewhat differently. It is a very difficult situation for the Palestinians, but what is very important is that the rulers of Palestine, Hamas, don't sort of play chicken. Too many people have died. It would be pity for more people to die. At the same time, and here comes your first point, which was very good, the problem is that they cannot be seen to be over weak because the threat to them from America and Israel of them being displaced is, of course, still strong. So therefore, they're walking a tightrope. But the protests are significant. They do show that some people are not fully supportive of the Hamas line, and they should rethink as a result.
Now, with the bombings, coming in from Israel and, like you said, U.S.'s support, do you see Palestinians moving towards these Arab nations just so that U.S. can go on to rebuild, the Gaza Strip?
No. It's quite clear that any movement out would mean out forever. Trump has already indicated this. And the other aspect is the Gazan zone experience. They were, after all, the Israel once used to be Palestine. And in that sense, the moment they left their homes, they never managed to get back. So they know perfectly well that if they leave Gaza, that is it for good. So therefore, I do not expect any movement on this issue. The key question is, how can Palestine coexist with Israel? But the movement out to other nations, I don't expect there to be one. Simply because that will be the end of Gaza for Palestinians.
What can significantly happen now, Dr. Marek, to turn the tide to ensure that this ceasefire deal continues?
What I think is very important is that the negotiators have a huge role to play. They've already, I think, brought about a huge progress with phase one. If it is not necessary to go through phase two precisely as was previously agreed, and Hamas are correct, there was a previous agreement. But if on the basis that the situation has changed, they could once again return to the negotiating table, that would be very good. But it hinges now on Qatar and Egypt. America, unfortunately, is not much use as a mediator because it's entirely on Israel's side. So it's really down to Egypt and Qatar to find a route, a way back to the negotiating table. That is not going to be easy, but I think it can be done in the sense that we've been over the many years in this situation before where there are two demands seemingly intransigent, but in fact, they have eventually found a route through. So it is possible, but hard work, time consuming, but it is possible.
Now, since we're talking about all the top stories, let's move to J.D. Vance's visit to the resource-rich Danish territory. What's your take on his comments about Denmark, especially that he's accusing Denmark of not having to do enough to protect the Greenland?
Yeah, it's kind of interesting. There's a PR aspect to this, of course. He's basically looking for a way by which America can take over Greenland. And this is, to that extent, merely an excuse. What is not so much an excuse is that, indeed, Denmark is, in effect, far too weak to protect Greenland. But precisely where is this threat to Greenland? After all, Russia has not made any moves towards Greenland as such. It's certainly not China. It may well be on the to-do list, but at present China is far more concerned with what happens in the seas near it. And of course, Russia is embroiled in Ukraine. And so that part of the narrative that he's trying to put across sounded a bit silly, to be honest. However, that overall Denmark has not invested enough in Greenland, sure. Yeah. Whether they'd be economically better off with America, sure. Whether they'd be better defended, sure. But do they need to be? Do they want to be? And so far, the Greenlanders have said no. So this speech, which is important by its way, has this aspect of trying to set out USA stall and let us see what Greenland makes of it. The key point is, please note, he arrived without an invitation. That's making it quite clear America is putting itself up there. It's not going to be put off by any comments that the Greenlanders made about turning their backs or whatever it was with the cultural. They're going to go ahead. And Vance made it quite clear that President Donald Trump intends to push on this issue. And that came across very well in this speech and is the key point.
Before I let you go, Marek, Trump has argued, however, that the United States needs the Arctic island for world peace. I wonder what that means. And with your last sentence, do you see him using force to take the Greenlanders?
Well, what he means for world peace is quite simple. He wants it in order to enhance, of course, to some degree, USA security. But the real point is he wants the mineral wealth of Greenland. That is the key point. And he, of course, has an excuse. His excuse is about there being a threat. And so this ties in well with Vance's comment. Whether he would invade Greenland, well, to be quite honest, one would have said a year ago that America would never invade. But Donald Trump has made many moves which were thought to be off the table, absolutely now part of the world we live in today. There are three aspects here. One, Donald Trump does not like wars. He really doesn't. And I think he's looking to, so to speak, convince the Greenlanders to join. Two, America has the military muscle to take over Greenland more or less tomorrow. Three, it would be a huge problem in world terms for America to invade. It means that it's back to the old days. Might is right. So all these complaints about Russia invading Ukraine would just vanish because, after all, if America can do it, why can't Russia? So the foreign policy implications are amazingly big. So therefore, my analysis is, yes, it is possible, but it's certainly not going to be immediate. He's looking to persuade, not to conquer at present.
Thank you, Dr. Marek Laskiewicz, for joining us to discuss the top stories.